Hello and welcome to the program. This is Geelani, your host, and today I have with me Advocate Parvez Imroz, who is the president of Jammu and Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society, and also we have Shazia Ahad with us, who works as a researcher with JK CCS. JK CCS, as you know, has been releasing annual human rights review reports, and today they have released a very significant report on torture, the situation of human rights abuse in Jammu and Kashmir, and this report has been named as torture, and Shazia has played a very important role in compiling this report. So first, my question would be to Shazia. Shazia, it is very important to document tragedies, but it's also a very difficult job in a conflict-ridden place like Jammu and Kashmir. You have examined, as I was going through the report, 432 cases of torture. So my question is, was it easy for you to interview these people? How difficult was it to get stories of pain and stories of torture from them? And what are the rampant techniques and what are the techniques that are being used currently? And what was your area of research focus?
So when I started working on this report, JK CCS had already been compiling the cases of torture for almost a decade. So when I joined, it was mostly about the compilation, but my team, we did some field work where we did talk to victims of torture. And what we found was that most of the people, they did not have any faith that anything is going to happen when they talk about their torture stories. Second was that some of them didn't want to revisit that trauma that they had been through. So it took some time on our part to convince them, to make them understand what these reports are and how they help. So sometimes we succeeded and sometimes we didn't. So there were times when people wouldn't talk to us, they didn't want to talk to us, so we couldn't do anything. So that happened at times. And plus, as you said, that we are living in an active conflict. We have seen that in the past 2-3 years, the situation is very volatile, particularly in South Kashmir. So when you go through the report, you will see, you may find that there is underrepresentation of cases from South Kashmir, but it was because going to South Kashmir was so difficult. It happened many times that we scheduled our visit and everything was done, and then something happened and we had to cancel. So that way it was very difficult for us, and then convincing people to talk to us. It did take some work on our part to make people talk about it. Second thing, you talked about the techniques or the methods of torture that are being or have been in use in Kashmir. So if you talk to people, it almost, when you go through all the case studies, you will see a pattern. So it is not that one person was subjected to one
kind of
torture form. It happened that it almost feels like the perpetrators have a special operating procedure, as we call it. You will feel that almost all the people are subjected to same kinds of torture. So it's not some rogue element. It's not some one person who went berserk.
It's systemic.
It's systemic. It's systematic as well. People have been, what we saw was, as soon as a person is arrested, he would be stripped naked and he would be beaten. That would be the first thing he will be subjected to. And then later he would be subjected to electrocution, many times to his genitals also. That was, when I talked to people, they said that when they were being electrocuted, they were being told simultaneously that we are doing this because we want to make you impotent, because we want to finish your generations. So they were being told while being electrocuted. Then there were people who have been subjected to waterboarding, people whose heads would be repeatedly dunked in water. Most of the times that water would be filthy or
Dirty.
contains chili powder. And then people would be hanged upside down. Roller treatment was very common. Roller treatment would lead to many health problems in people later on in their lives. So there are many torture methods that have been used on a single person. It's not.
Yeah. Mr. Imroz, I want to know it from you that when we talk about waterboarding, we normally have been, listening to the cases or, tragedies. What happened in Guantanamo Bay, for example, or during the Iraq War, Abu Ghraib prison. So these were the kind of images which we used to see on television or read on the internet. But imagining that this has been happening also in Jammu and Kashmir for past so many years, give us a context. Please make us understand that how do you think, as a human rights defender who has been working on this issue for so many years, that one of the torture centers which now happens to be an official residence of a former chief minister also. So give us a context that how you have dealt with such cases and how difficult it is to document pain.
You see, unlike other human rights violations, the torture is the only violation, where the victim has not hesitated, because he is not taking any legal action, and torture is not a crime under the Indian law. India has not signed even the UN Convention on torture. But we are, when the report is, why this report is very different than the other reports, right? Torture is one of the human rights violations. It's not a human right, it's a crime against humanity, if they are being done in a systematic and institutional manner. And it continues unabatedly, right? Because they are arresting people, they have torture camps which are in the report. But we are seeing, like in the Guantanamo Bay and in the Abu Ghraib, that what was the number there? It was 7,000 or 800. It became a huge global issue, There were the whistleblowers there, even the officials, they leaked the photographs to the international community, and there was a huge international condemnation on the torture techniques being inflicted on the prisoners there or convicts. But here it has become a non-issue. I mean, we have not given the correct figures, because we are saying there are tens of thousands. It's not these 432 cases are just the tip. There would be tens of thousands. If you see, I think every 10th or every 15th Kashmiri is being tortured, then there are degrees of the torture, so we have been only concerned that if there has been such a huge attention about the torture in other areas, like Abu Ghraib and Iraq, why not here? And the perpetrators, they think they will get away with it because there has been not a very effective campaign by the human rights groups here. And the important thing is that because the international human rights organizations who have been working on torture in other areas, in other countries in the world, and they have prepared the reports and other things, but here they have not visited here, or they have not prepared the report here. There's no report on torture by any international human rights organization. There's no such report.
Mr. Imroz, if we talk about your reports particularly, you give these annual human rights review reports, and there was also one report on alleged perpetrators. And recently, United Nations also released a report on the human rights situation in both parts of Jammu and Kashmir, and which actually blamed Indian armed forces of using unlawful killing people unlawfully, without taking legal measures. And recently we have two cases. One was of that lecturer Shabir Ahmed, who was from Crew, and it was alleged that the Indian army actually took him and then they tortured him to death. And one of the most recent cases was that of a school principal, Rizwan, who was from Avantipura, and there's also this allegation that he was tortured in police custody. So this means that this is not a thing of the past. This continues, this practice continues. What do you have to say about this?
That's what we are saying. Any sovereign country has a responsibility to take the accountability for the perpetrator, right? If the sovereign country is given impunity, and we say there are all sort of impunity, legal, political, moral impunity, which is more dangerous, given by the army, generals, than politicians, than even the Indian media, and to some extent the Indian civil society also, So we say that Then what was the question I forgot?
My question is that this practice actually continues. It appears that these practices of torture still continue.
No, that I'm telling you that if the state fails to, if a sovereign state fail to seek accountability from the perpetrator, on the contrary, they are giving the impunity, that it is the duty of the international institutions, international community, to seek accountability, to make an international humanitarian intervention, like Kashmir, where we have, I will not be exaggerating, that if there are more than 200,000 torture survivors here, and a lot of torture survivors have died. A lot of torture survivors have died here.
Shazia, just to focus on this report, previously we have witnessed reports on the mass graves, presence of mass graves, and also there has a lot has been written on the custodial disappearances, between 8 to 10,000 cases of custodial disappearances. But my question to you is that while compiling this report, a very significant report, one factor could be that the people are not coming out because of the fear factor or the stigma in the society. If there have been some, as you said, that people have been rendered impotent in some cases. And the third thing which you also mentioned was that they actually do not trust the judicial system. They actually don't have faith that what will happen if we narrate our stories. How please, tell us more about this.
So, talking particularly in terms of the research that we have done for this report, in the 432 case studies, you will see that only 27 people went to State Human Rights Commission. And what is more interesting is that in 20 of those cases, the order was in favor of the complainant. So, in a way, it was SHRC acknowledging the use of torture against the petitioner or against the victim. But what happened was, as we know, there has been no prosecution. It's the state itself which is acknowledging the use of torture. State itself which is accepting that for example, when a petitioner says that this unit of army perpetrated torture on this person, and then it gives it because SHRC is a recommendatory body, it gives a recommendation of compensation, for example, or recommendation that this case should be investigated. There have been cases that SHRC, in all the cases, the SHRC has given recommendations in favor of the complainant, but then there is no prosecution.
Which means that they have acknowledged that this has happened.
The use of torture. In the 432 cases, we saw only 3 cases which have gone to the court. There's one case where there was compensation given to the person who was tortured. But this person had to fight in the court for almost 17 years. In those 17 years, he had to undergo 5 surgeries for the torture, because of the torture that had been perpetrated on him. And maybe this person was a bit well-to-do, that he could afford going to the court for 17 years and simultaneously his treatment going on. But there are people who cannot follow cases for like decades, and there are people who suffer. They suffer from health issues. They suffer economic problems because torture renders people unable to work.
And psychologically also.
And there have been cases we have documented here in this report where people suffer from psychological issues. There are people who suffer from symptoms of PTSD. So they are rendered economically backward. So these people don't have any means to follow these cases in courts. And particularly when these cases go on for decades. So it is, for all the reasons, it is justice denied to these people. So they don't see any reason for going to any courts.
Shazia made this point about SHRC and its recommendations. We have 2, SHRC chairpersons on record saying that SHRC in itself is a toothless tiger and it is a dead horse. So what happens to these recommendations given your experience of last 30 years?
No, the recommendation of the State Human Rights Commission, number one, they don't have the mandate on the army.
Because of the AFSPA?
Because of the AFSPA, yeah. No, because the army is excluded from the State Human Rights Commission. Second is that the the recommendations made by the State Human Rights Commission are not binding. They are not being implemented, even according to their own reports. Then the other thing, it's not a question of SHRC. That is a question of the judiciary also. So we say that as far we have the judiciary here, the High Court of J&K, that how many cases of torture, number one, they have been taken there, right? Right? Then in how many cases of torture that the High Court or the judiciary have given compensation? The case Shazia was saying about that Manzoor Rahman Naiku, a rod was inserted in his rectum, and he had to go 4 or 5 times the surgery. Yeah. And later on that his the feces were coming out from this body, that he was carrying that bag that for 17, 18 years. Then he was the only exceptional case. That if you remember that there was another case, 4 cases were such like Murtaza from Shupian, they died. He was the guy that who fought the case and also is surviving now. So there are no such accountability from any institutions here, right? Because the reality is also the tortured survivors feel happy that, not happy, they feel content that they are alive, they are not dead like the other people there.
The delusion of reprieve, which is
So that, and the other thing is also where Shazia was saying you that why there was a very getting the details, the interviews from the torture survivors were very gigantic task, that because they don't have faith even on the international human rights bodies. Yeah, they really feel that is not, because this report is an endeavor that how we can make a change, that how, if torture is not going to stop, but how it gets minimized, right? And then how we can reach to the international institutions, international INGOs, right? That why Kashmir is not being, the issue of torture in Kashmir is not being attended, is not being, talked about here. If you have been talking the torture in other places, why not in Kashmir, where you have, I think in Kashmir is the only place that where in Asia where there will be the maximum number of the torture survivors.
One last question would be, in these 432 cases, are these survivors only victims of the armed forces, the Indian Army, J&K police, or do you also have some cases where the non-state actors have perpetrated such torture techniques?
There are cases in this report where people have been tortured or subjected to inhuman treatment by the non-state actors. And we saw, if you see the cases that when the person was first tortured by some non-state actors, then he was picked up by the army, and then the army tortured them again. So there are cases that we have documented in this report. So yes, we have done that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parvez Imroz, and thank you, Shazia, for this. And we hope that the dignity to a life of Kashmiri returns sooner. Thank you very much for watching this program. Thank you.